coming back to life in every country. However, no one is able to explain that happening. It has been estimated that 70 million people have been revived throughout the whole world. In this little town, the resurrections lasted a little more than 2 hours and ended with almost 13,000 returned that are now wandering through the streets. By checking the cemetery register, the council learns that the revived crowd is formed by people who died in the past 10 years. There are both men and women and people of all ages, but more than 65% of them are over 60 years old. The only thing they all have in common is their health. Their bodies are in a perfect state and any pre-death sickness is gone. To keep such a huge crowd off the streets, the mayor decides to transform the local community center and the warehouses into shelters for the returned. It is essential to keep them together in one place so they can identify them and send them back to their families. Since they are in perfect health, they're normal citizens again with all the corresponding rights. The council theorizes this whole process will take from 3 to 6 months to finish. The police and the army immediately start preparing the facilities for all the returned, who will be organized by gender and age. They have to comply with the UN's regulations, which are very similar to refugee aid. One of the revived is soon identified as the mayor's wife Martha. However, when someone tries taking her to the mayor, he refuses to see her and sends her home. Soldiers collect all the returned on buses to drive them to facilities. They should constantly stop them from wandering off and get them back in line. Council member Isham and his wife Veronique soon enter a shelter, searching for their 6-year-old son Sylvain, who passed away a few years ago. They realize that the returned are examined and questioned but do not reveal any kind of emotion. Looks like they're always looking into the space and say nothing unless someone addresses them first. There's a mother who is presented with her renewed baby and shock makes her immobile. So a nurse advises her that now she can take the kid home or leave him in there till she is ready. Isham and Veronique show a picture of their son to a soldier. When he finally brings Sylvain over, the couple is shocked to see he hasn't aged a day. They're also told he can stay here until they're ready and visit him as often as they want. Later at the mayor's house, he finally reunites with his wife. Martha welcomes him home and comments on little things like him being late or looking tired. She even touches his face, pretending as if she had never gone away. Rachel avoids the restrooms all along and feels horrified when she looks around at the crowds returning. Back home, she can't think of what to do about this situation. 2 years back, her husband Matthew had met a car crash but she's over with him in grief and gone on with her life. Bringing him into her life again could feel like she was regressing. At the sheltered dorms, Matthew won't go to sleep and the nurses have to remind him to do so. Sometime later at work, Isham points out Rachel has been avoiding him, but she just makes up a bunch of excuses while feeling uncomfortable by her returned working at the cafeteria. Isham shares details about his time visiting Sylvain and how happy he is to see him play again as if he was never dead. He also asks Rachel about her husband, but she quickly changes the subject. A few days later the town council holds a new meeting to discuss the issues that are arising because of the returned. They're facing a potential housing problem, not to mention unemployment. Even if they could find positions for all of them, the returned are slow and don't communicate well, so there's no guarantee they could keep that job in the first place. The way the returned function is quite peculiar since sometimes they suffer from effects similar to the symptoms of a concussion, like disorientation and sleep disturbance. However, their motor functions work just fine. All these symptoms come and go, almost as if they were in a latent period. The doctors also noticed that getting a job allows the state of the return to progress and get healthier, so even if the reintegration project is putting a toll on the council's budget, cancelling it would bring worse consequences. Meanwhile, Matthew is working as an architect once more, but the problems quickly arise as the council had forecasted. He is very slow, lethargic, and only speaks when someone else talks to him first. During meetings his slow speech makes it difficult for the others to know when he's done talking. Although Matthew is already part of the town life thanks to his job, Rachel hasn't tried to contact him yet and he sometimes watches her through the window. One afternoon, Rachel sees Sylvain standing in a bush while staring at nothing, which creeps her out. Veronique quickly arrives to retrieve her son and sends him back to playing with other kids in the park. As Veronique is observing him, Isham comes along and comments that they should already take Sylvain to live with them, but Veronique becomes uneasy and announces she is going home, using tiredness as a pretext. Isham brings their dog to play with Sylvain and notices how the animal would bark at the returned elderly. Sometime later the council discusses a new issue. The elderly return wander off a lot and it's hard to keep them in the facilities or in their homes, no matter if it's night or day. They're not very aware of their surroundings, so a simple walk is dangerous for them. Since they are retired, they don't work either. Experts theorize that they may look for a familiar place, or perhaps it is only a response resulting from the trauma of dying. Studies show that these particular returned are full of energy and very resistant to infection, probably because their body temperature is lower than that of a regular human. To address this, Dr. Gardet creates a medicine that lets them sleep better at night and less in the day. This invention is licensed and marketed right away so every family will have access to it. Gardet also creates tranquilizer darts with this medicine for the soldiers, explaining that it only works like mid-sedative on the returned. A normal human would sleep for 2 days and wake up feeling sick, thereby taking days in recovery, thus they have to be cautious who they shoot at. One evening while watching the returned, a soldier tells Gardet that some are only pretending to sleep. Within a short notice, Matthew is seen dressed up and leaving the facility. The soldier explains to him that Matthew does that every night and he's just going to work. Finding this very strange, Gardet decides to follow Matthew. At the office, he is surprised to find the group of returned having a meeting and chatting normally. The security guard tells him they do this every night. Sometime later Rachel is going home after work and notices Matthew following her. She doesn't dare say anything and Matthew also says nothing, so they begin walking back home in complete silence. Secretly, he follows them because he has been learning about Matthew's behavior. At home, Rachel is still uncomfortable with the presence of her husband, so she immediately goes and hides in her room. In the meantime, the mayor holds a party to welcome Martha back in front of all the family. She's happy to see everyone but doesn't eat, claiming she's never hungry in the evenings. Suddenly she turns around as if she heard something and leaves to walk into the garden. Her caretaker reveals she spends her entire days walking around the yard with no purpose. The mayor follows Martha and tries to bring her back, but she pays no mind to him and keeps on walking, only stopping to greet her granddaughter. That night, Rachel finally works up the courage to approach Matthew and they successfully communicate with each other. Eventually, she gains enough courage to kiss him, and they end up getting dirty in the living room, unaware that Gardet is watching them through the window. During the next meeting, the council discusses the return's low body temperature, which makes them appear as creepy white figures on thermal cameras. Since they're desperate to learn more about the mysterious meetings, they decide to attach a bunch of thermal cameras to balloons to follow the return's night activity. When the first report comes in, they learn that the returned cover an average of 9 miles a day regardless of age or gender. The older people are slow, but they don't stop until they're done. The cameras also confirm that night meetings are happening all over town, but it's too early to recognize any patterns. As this is being explained, the mayor notices Rachel leave the room. As days go by, the elderly returned are getting more restless and keep walking away a lot. Rachel feels extremely comfortable with Matthew and even welcomes him into her life once again. She feels she should not attend the council meetings as they discuss the returned in a very offensive manner. With summer having begun, Matthew hates the heat and keeps waiting for a swimming session. Meanwhile, Veronique is watching her son play outside, not looking too happy about having the boy live with them again. Suddenly an old returned appears and makes Sylvain's game move too fast, so Isham rushes to stop him. When he looks at his wife, she's hurrying back inside. One night, Rachel hears a noise and leaves the bed to investigate. She finds Gardet outside claiming he only wants to help her cope with the situation and that he knows how she feels. He wonders if she knows that Matthew sneaks out every night to go to the office, but Rachel says her husband only has trouble falling asleep and he's fine. After kicking Gardet out, Rachel returns to her room and finds Matthew awake. He asks if she was talking to someone, but she says she wasn't. Sometime later at work, Matthew's boss notices that his report makes no sense and tries to explain what's wrong, but Matthew doesn't understand him. This causes him to get demoted to the factory area where all the returned work. During the next council meeting, the doctors bring a big update. It turns out that the returned's semi-normal behavior isn't natural. They only imitate what normal humans do and do things they remember from their previous life. This makes them incapable of taking on any responsibilities and, even with proper training, can learn only very simple tasks. They'll have to determine whether the returned should be expelled from society or if they can be accommodated in a highly defined niche. Some days later, Matthew wakes up and exits the house unnoticed by Rachel. Gardet follows him, and this time he manages to reach the night gathering. The returned are all talking at once and discussing routes they should take as they point to maps. Meanwhile, Sylvain has been pounding on the front door for an hour, trying to get out of the apartment. Veronique finally drags him away and informs Isham that they should consider the government's special education program for the returned kids since she thinks Sylvain frightens the normal kids. However, Isham does not trust the council. When Veronique tries to administer another dose of the sedative to Sylvain, Sylvain keeps turning his head away and an angry Isham stops her. Getting upset, Veronique says their son only wants to leave them and it's as if he never really came back. Meanwhile, Martha takes a chair to the garden and tries to use it to jump over the fence, but the mayor stops her just in time. The next day, the mayor shares his situation with Rachel. He's worried that one morning he'll wake up and Martha will have disappeared. He admits he locked Martha up in the bedroom last night and that lately she scares him. Rachel refuses to talk, and when the mayor asks her about Matthew, she walks away. Meanwhile, at work, Matthew starts having flashbacks of the day of his death, remembering he left with the car after a fight with Rachel. Eventually Rachel goes to see Gardet, who shows her a video of Matthew's first interview. He seemed sharper than the others and answered the questions about his past perfectly, but spontaneous speech failed him. He also didn't understand that he'd been gone for 2 years. Rachel wants to know how to help her husband, but Gardet tells her she must come to terms with the fact Matthew will never be normal again. Upset and frustrated, Rachel storms out. When she gets home, she discovers Matthew is gone. At Isham's home, Sylvain looks out the window at an elderly man in the backyard. At the same time, the mayor wakes up when he hears Martha getting out of bed, but she convinces him to go back to sleep before she sneaks out of the house. Moments later, at the park, a security guard notices the returned gathering and tries to send them home, but they ignore him. Suddenly something blows up behind the guard. Soon explosions begin happening all over town, causing dangerous fires. Meanwhile, all the returned are leaving their homes and gathering at a tunnel. This is the plan they discussed during the meetings all along. Matthew stares at the returned going down the tunnels and decides to go back. Soon the mayor finally notices his wife is missing and goes out in his car to look for her. He discovers that she is departing with other returned people and at once pulls her to his car, but then the other persons surround his vehicle to ensure he does not drive away. Martha asks him whether he's bored and wants to go away with them, thus advises him to leave her because at once, within a minute, the mayor is dead and turns out to be returned to, so both of them rejoin other hiding in the tunnel. Hours later, the news proclaimed that the blasts have caused no casualties and a curfew has been imposed throughout the nation. No one knows where the returned are, and the people are warned not to look for them. Sylvain wants to leave all the same and Veronique believes they should set him free, but Isham declines. In his desperation, Sylvain eventually jumps. Isham cries seeing the body lying on the ground, thinking that his son has died once again. However, Sylvain is okay and walks out to join all the returned. Determined to fight back, the military prepares grenades filled with a particular chemical that could put the returned in an irreversible coma. Soon they find a group of returned trying to reach the tunnels and start gassing them, falling unconscious one by one, including Sylvain. Meanwhile, Matthew goes back home and tells Rachel that the day after the fight he left work early to talk to her and apologize, but he did not find her at home, so he went in search of her, driving so fast that he was killed in the crash. Crushed under the weight of her conscience, Rachel has a breakdown. The scene is broken into by Gardet bursting into the apartment. Matthew hears him, so the couple escapes through the window. As she hears the gas explosions in the distance, Rachel follows Matthew into a tunnel. After walking for a while, She cries as she kisses him goodbye. Matthew leaves and Rachel has to go home alone. On her way back, Rachel watches the soldiers take the unconscious return back to the cemetery. Each body is left on top of their corresponding grave and they slowly disappear.